All right, I think I'm going to try and combine two different sand related. Actually, let's see if we can combine three into one here because these are all relatively quick. So, the first one I'm going to start with is just a saying here, and I'm just going to leave it pretty much at this and then move on to the next topic. I have nothing to teach you, you cannot teach yourself. All right, and then so we are going to move on to building a sandcastle. So the reason why I want to talk about this is because I love going to the beach and making a sandcastle. And I feel like that's seen as like a kiddie thing. Like only kids build sandcastles, and you don't see a lot of adults doing this. But I think that more people should, and I don't know why so many people don't. And I think the reason why is what I'm gonna say here is why waste your time making something that will get destroyed? I think a lot of people look at it as a pointless task. Why would I waste my time building a sandcastle? I'm just going to leave it behind, or I'm just going to destroy it, or it's just going to get destroyed by someone else, or maybe the waves are going to wash it away. So what's the point of putting my time and effort into creating this thing that's just going to get destroyed anyway? Like, what's the point, right? And the reason why I think that it's important and why I think more people should do this is because you think anything you have done in your life or, will ever do is any different than this sandcastle. So what I'm saying here is that if you look at what's the point of building a sandcastle, it's just, if you look at this as, what's the point of building a sandcastle? It's just going to get destroyed anyway. Anything and everything you have done or will ever do falls into that category. Maybe some things will last longer than others, but in the grand scheme of things, thinking out towards infinity, nothing, like in 1,000 years, how much of what you've done will still be there, right? How much of you will be remembered? And it's a very sobering thought. But the reality is that a majority of people will be forgotten within 100 years. Your family may kind of know who you are, but like I barely even know who my great-grandparents are. So my great-great-grandparents, yeah, no, I don't know anything about them. And they were alive probably within the past 100 years. And they're already out of my memory. And if they're out of my memory, then no one beyond me, like the kids that I have or anyone else, is not gonna know who they were, right? So their impact, their legacy is basically just in the family, but like what they've actually done, has potentially been undone or doesn't exist anymore. It's just, and so, what I'm trying to say here is that it does not matter what you do. In the grand scheme of things, it's relatively pointless. But that doesn't mean that you can't do it anyway and enjoy doing it and do it for the sake of doing it, right? So it's like, why do I build a sandcastle? Because I think it's fun. And I think it's cool to make a sandcastle. And I know that at the end of the day, I'm going to leave it behind and it's probably going to get smashed, but that's just life, and so be it. I didn't make it for it to last forever. I made it for right now. And so I think that it's good for everyone to make sandcastles because it helps you kind of come to terms with that and realize that, not everything is going to last forever. And that's okay. And that doesn't mean that it's pointless and life is not worth living. It means that it's worth living all the more because it's not forever. And so you got to make the most of it while you have it. And, if everything's pointless, then why not have a good time? Why not enjoy it? Because there's nothing else to do anyway. There's nothing better to do. Everything is pointless. So why not have a good time? And so, yeah, I think that that's, something to think about. So now we will go on to the third thing here. This also has to do with sand, but in a different way. Do you think that a grain of sand knows you are making a sandcastle? Do you think it understands that that is what it's a part of? What makes you think it could comprehend your hand? What it is, why things are happening to it, right? So, just to clarify, I'm saying, so imagine that you're like a grain of sand in this sandcastle that you're building, is aware that it's being moved around, right? But it doesn't know why it's being moved around. It doesn't know what's moving it around. And it doesn't know that it's being built into a sandcastle. It doesn't know what's going on or where it is or why it is. But it knows that it's being moved around, right? And so what makes you think that it would be able, even if it did see your hand, what makes you think it would understand that that's a hand, that is, shaping me into a structure? What makes you think that it would understand that it is in a structure, that there's something being built in the first place? And the answer is that there's just no way that this grain of sand would understand and comprehend that you are building a sandcastle. And even if it could, it wouldn't understand why. It would be like, why are you doing this? What's the point? Why are you doing this? Why am I becoming a part of this sandcastle? And the answer is, why not? But that's not a good answer to the sand. The sand's like, no, I need more than that. And the answer is there is nothing more. But so, you may say, well, that is sand. I'm human. And I ask, how is a human any different than sand to God? You don't hate the sand. You don't necessarily love the sand, but you mold it into shape and you enjoy the process. What is the purpose? What is the motive? Why do we need one? We exist. Okay, sorry, hold on. I read that wrong. What is the purpose? What is the motive? Why do we need one? We exist. We are beautiful, and so is this world. Isn't that enough? Enjoy the creation for what it is, not what it could or should be. There is perfection in imperfection. And so what I'm saying is that this grain of sand is an analogy for us, and the hand or us forming the sand is, God. This quote unquote God is potentially immaterial. It doesn't need to be a physical thing, in my opinion. You could see God as entropy itself. And, I think that would honestly be justifiable. And it doesn't matter. The point is that you can't comprehend what God is anyway. So whether or not God exists or not isn't really important, because knowing that God exists doesn't change how you live your life. I mean, it really shouldn't. If you live differently because God exists, I mean, if it's strictly because God exists, then I don't there's no you don't need to fear God because it's like, do you think the grain of sand fears you? Do you think the grain of sand should fear you? Why should this grain of sand being formed into a sandcastle fear you, right? Because even if the grain of sand disobeys you and falls off the sandcastle and tumbles down to out I don't know, the hole that you just dug, Um, do you care? Are you mad at that grain of sand? No, you don't care. You're just gonna scoop up another batch, another handful of sand to add to your sandcastle. It doesn't matter. You're not mad at. You're not going to punish or anything this grain of sand. It's just doing its thing, and you're just doing your thing. And you know, if it complies and it says, "All right, fine, I'm a part of the sandcastle now," then that's great. But if it doesn't want to, that's also fine. It doesn't matter to you. You're going to build the sandcastle anyway. Whether or not the sand wants to be a part of it is of no concern to you. Right? And so, I think it's also important to understand that sand is sand. What we see as sand in our sandcastle is potentially how God sees us. And, things happen in our life that we we potentially can't explain, or we don't understand why they're happening to us. But, what makes you think that you ever could or ever would? Because it's just way beyond you. Comparing sand to a person is it's absurd. There's not really much to compare against, right? A grain of sand is so different. And yet, I think that that's pretty much the same kind of thing we're looking at here. Like there's just no comparison. There's no way to, line these things up. Like a grain of sand will never be comparable to a human on the same level, right? Like it's like the grain of sand is not going to become sentient and start building its own sandcastles. That's not how this works. At least not sandcastles at the human scale. But maybe it'll start an avalanche or something. I don't know. Yeah, but I think it's important. What I'm trying to say with this part is I think it's important to understand that, at the end of the day, you're kind of irrelevant. You're negligible. So don't worry so much about how God perceives your actions, and focus more on how you perceive your actions. Because at the end of the day, that's really what matters most. And I feel like that can also be a slippery slope, because some people can use that to justify being just completely awful. But I don't know if there's really a good way to combat that. Some people are just here to be bad. And they think they're being good, but sometimes people are a little misled, so they do bad things. Maybe that's me. Maybe I'm being misled here. Maybe I think that I'm preaching great wisdom here, and actually I am giving people just the worst advice. I don't know. I'd like to think that I'm not. So, ideally I'm doing good, but there's only so much that I can do, so my intentions are for good. And if the result is not that, then I guess I didn't do a good job. But I don't know. Sorry, I guess. Like, I don't think it's really worth worrying about, because I don't know what I don't know, right? So I don't know. But it's also important to just kind of realize that you are being you are being used to build something beautiful. But if you don't want to be a part of it, you don't have to, right? And it doesn't matter. The beautiful thing will get built without you. You just won't be a part of it. And so you can stay as a part of the beach, or you can be a part of the beach that is, something more than just a pile of sand. A sandcastle is something more than just a pile of sand. And what makes it more than a pile of sand is really the only distinction between a pile of sand and a sandcastle is that it looks different, right? Right? A pile of sand has no guidance, no direction, no vision. And a sandcastle tells a story. It has structure. It has, meaning. A pile of sand is just a pile of sand. I guess you could argue that there's structure and meaning in this pile of sand, and sure, if you want to say that, then you can. But personally, if I had to choose between being in just a pile of sand or in a cool sandcastle, I'm going to be a part of the sandcastle. I think that that's more fun. I think that that's more interesting. So, personally, if God's going to put me in this sandcastle, then I'll gladly do my part, right? Because why not? Like, why not? I'm just a grain of sand on the beach. What else am I going to do? Chill there? Yeah. That's really all that's on my agenda is vibe out. So if someone's going to put me in a sandcastle, I'll join. Sure. Yeah. But I don't know. There's certain things that kind of, happen in your life, and if you're paying attention, then you notice that it feels intentional. It feels guided, and you can ignore that and say, no, that's not a thing, and say that that's not how life works, and there's no like little, symbolisms and messages in your life, and maybe you're right, but I think that it's more fun to think that, I'm right. So I'm going to pretend like I'm getting little messages saying, good job, Sam, keep up the good work, because it doesn't really change my life much, and I'm, and I get to have more fun. There's more, I don't know. It's just more fun. And at the end of the day, it just comes down to it's more fun. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah, lots of sands in this one. So peace out.